I think we should take a look at what these local governments are doing and why that seems to be so scary to ALEC and the Minnesota Business Partnership and some other groups, some legislators, that we have to come here and try and preempt those local governments from making those decisions. The issues we're talking about are worker protection provisions. Sir Osmick, yes, businesses are allowed to pay more. I think I see a problem with businesses who want to pay less. Workers, the reason we have minimum wage laws, the reason we should have paid sick laws is to protect the workers, to make sure they get a fair shake. And why are people going to, in the cases that people have been talking about, to Minneapolis and St. Paul, successfully passing paid sick leave provisions, trying to pass $15 an hour minimum wage? Why are they going there? These are people who are struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to deal with sick kids. They're struggling to pay the bills, to put food on the table. And they see, and I agree with them, that the state and federal governments haven't stepped in to protect them. It's because we and the federal government have not protected them. They turn to the local officials. They petition them. That's what a democracy is about. People are supposed to petition their government for change. And that's what they've done. So now that scares us. We've got to do something to block them. Well, these workers, why do they go there? Well, if you look at Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're both fairly prosperous cities, but about a quarter of the people in both Minneapolis and St. Paul live in poverty. 1 in 4 people in Minneapolis and St. Paul live in poverty. Almost half of African Americans in the communities live in poverty. That's not something that I frankly don't think, looking around this chamber, I don't know that any of us in this chamber have experienced that in recent years. I don't know if we know what it is, but it's a crisis. If you talk to, and you can find plenty of them, and I'll introduce you to some if you want, single moms who lose their housing, and they and their kids are couch hopping to try and find a place to stay. And kids, and when we're talking about education and what makes kids succeed, kids who are already in their second or third school this year because they're bumping in unstable housing, that's a crisis. You talk to a young worker who can't afford housing, who's sleeping in his car, that's a crisis. And that's something that those of us in this chamber don't always feel. It's not a crisis to us. It might not be good, but I don't think we see it as the crisis that somebody who doesn't have a home to go to sees. So they're going, they don't see any action at the state or federal level, so they go to their local city councils and say, please help us. Please help us and do something about this. And I recognize, and several people have eloquently said, why the Chamber of Commerce and Business Partnership and ALEC are concerned about how this would have different standards between communities. And I understand that, and that's a legitimate concern. I'm not sure it's a crisis in the same way that somebody goes to bed hungry night after night. I'm not sure it fits the level of crisis, but it's something we ought to try and address. But the way to address it, instead of barring local governments from passing these ordinances, or instead of preempting them, we should address worker protection at the state level. Pass Senator Pappas's bill on paid sick leave. I've got a bill for $15 an hour. Sign on to that. We do it statewide. You don't have to worry about those differences. And yes, I frankly think the folks in Minneapolis, it's not like, yeah, if you put in $15 an hour today, it would really cause some troubles in the economy. So what do? They phase it in. Despite the 15 now, I think the Minneapolis proposal was phased in over 5 years. We've gone through an experiment with phasing in an increase over 3 years, and it worked. And you do it that way, and you do it in a rational way, you can do it. But instead of trying to say, we're not going to let these people who are exercising their democratic rights and organizing and talking to their local officials and saying, please give us protection. Please help us. We're in a crisis. Please support us, because the state and federal governments won't. Then maybe, instead of trying to stop them from doing it, maybe we should avoid the need for them to pass it by doing it ourselves. That's the direction we ought to head. But the bottom line is I understand why a lot of businesses don't like this. That is a concern, but we could do that by addressing it at the state level. But preempting these local governments from addressing and providing basic protections for sick workers, for worker wages and benefits, it seems to me that that's something that if we're not going to do it, we should be hoping our local governments are stepping in for us. I urge you to vote against this bill. I think we can help our working people in ways that don't crush the protections that some communities are willing to give them.